Hi, we're looking here at backward variances. The objectives for today are to apply variance analysis, as we already know, to identify unknown data. The unknown data may either be the standards or the actuals, and the issue about what we're doing here is we're using variances that are already known. So we know how to calculate variances. We know how to use the standard pro formas. What we have now is a situation where we're given the variance, but we need to find out the other bits of information. So either some of the standard information is missing or some of the actual information is missing. How do we go about it? Well, the simple solution is we use the pro forma again. This way, we know exactly what it is that we are looking for. So, let's look at a question. If you remember, the pro forma looks a bit like this. We have our standard quantity standard price, our actual quantity standard price, and our actual quantity actual price. And looking at a question, this is the sort of thing that you may get. If you look at the top, we're given some standards. So, we know the standard usage and we know the standard price. We're also given the actual output. The only other information that we're given is the material usage and the material price variances. And what we want to do is to calculate the actual quantity used and the actual price paid. So we start with the pro forma, no problem. And the first thing we do is we slot in anything that we know from the information in the question. So for example, in the question we were told the standards. We know the standard quantity is 3 litres and we know the standard price is 8. And that gives us the standard cost per unit, the expected cost for 1 unit. If we multiply that by the actual output, we get 28,800. Once we've filled in any bits and pieces we know on the left-hand side, what we can then do is slot in the variances. Here we have 2 variances, an adverse usage variance and an adverse price variance. Now what we have to remember here is that if we have an adverse variance, that means that the bottom is bigger than the top. And from that perspective, we can simply calculate what the actual quantity standard price is and what the actual quantity actual price is. Because it's adverse, to work from top to bottom, we will add back the variance. So we know that the actual quantity standard price is 30,000 and the actual quantity actual price is 31,250. Given that we already know the standard price, that means that we can work out what the actual quantity will be. We simply take the £30,000 that we have, divide through by the standard price of 8, and hey presto, we have 3,750 litres. So we have managed to calculate one of the answers needed, the actual quantity used. Given that we have the actual quantity used, we can go one step further. You see, now we have the actual quantity, we can take the bottom value we have there, 31,250, and if we divide through by the number of litres, we get the actual price that we paid. So we've managed to establish the 2 values that we needed. Notice how the pro forma helps us here. So to recap what we've just done, firstly, we slotted anything that we know on the left-hand side, anything to do with the standards and actuals. Secondly, we introduced the variances. Thirdly, we are then able to establish the total values. And finally, what we do is work through to find the detail that is specifically required. Let's look at a second question. We're looking at labour variances now, and we're given quite a lot of actual information. So we're told the actual hours worked, the actual rate per hour paid, the standard hours per unit, and then we're given 3 variances. We've got the labour rate variance, the labour idle time variance, and the labour efficiency variance. we're required to calculate the standard rate per hour and the actual units produced. So, as we did it before, we start with our pro forma. And of course, because we have the idle time variance here, we have to make a distinction between the actual hours worked and the actual hours paid. So slightly more sophisticated than maybe the most basic of labour variances. As we did it before, the first thing we do is to slot in the information on the left-hand side. So we know the standard hours per unit are 5. At the bottom, we know the actual hours, and we also know the actual rate. Now, the actual hours here will be the actual hours paid because we've made a distinction between hours paid and hours worked. So we can calculate that actual hours, actual rate are 26,500. We've also slotted on the right-hand side the variances. So we have an efficiency and an idle time variance, both of which are adverse, and we have a rate variance, which is favourable. Remember what we said. If it's a favourable variance, the top will be greater than the bottom, and if it's an adverse variance, the top will be less than the bottom. So in simple time, what we do is we work through. If we're looking at actual hours paid standard rate, that will be greater because it's a favourable variance, so we add back the favourable variance. But with both the idle time and the efficiency variances, they will be less because they're adverse variances. So we've worked out what it is that we need in total terms. All we have to do now is to hunt down the individual values that were required in the question. So, actual hours paid are 2120. We're able to calculate that the standard rate is £13 per hour. We've got one of our answers straight off. Actual hours worked standard rate. We didn't actually need this, but I'm just being comprehensive in calculating everything. We noticed that the actual hours worked were 2,000 hours. And if we're looking at the standard hours standard rate, if you remember, we knew that we had 5 hours per unit. And we calculated a moment ago the standard rate. So if we divided the total value by both the 5 hours and the £13 per hour, we are able to calculate the actual output of 380 units. So the actual units produced are 380 units. If you remember to use the pro forma, I don't think that this is a difficult topic area for you at all. So the key in this topic, just like so much of variance analysis, is your ability to use the basic pro forma, and that comes with practice and more practice. In summary, when we look at backward variances, there are 4 steps. We identify the appropriate pro forma. We fill in the numbers on the left-hand side that you know. We derive all the other numbers, given that we know the variances, and then we answer the question as set. The key to this is to use pro formas that we already know. In the example that we had, we looked at material pro formas and labour pro formas for variances. Now, what you need to do is to go and look at an assessment task that reflects how this is dealt with by the examiner. Good luck.